Hi, everyone, and welcome to Chai Side Chat Season 2. This is an exclusive interdisciplinary talk show featuring interviews with folks about creativity, the arts, healing, personal growth, spirituality, identity, among many other things. I'm Aishwarya Subramanian, your host for the show, and I'm excited to introduce my guests for this episode of Chai Side Chats. So today we're going to be talking about holistic healing and mental health, and I have with me two immensely talented therapists and artists. My first guest is a psychologist, writer, and Kathak dancer based in New York City, whose clinical work focuses on youth suicide prevention, sexuality, and relationship issues in the Indo-Caribbean and South Asian communities. She frequently incorporates elements from Eastern and Western spiritual traditions as they intersect with mental health. You can find some of her writings, musings, and insights on her Instagram page as Dr. Samosa. My second guest is a licensed professional counselor and a trained Bharatanatyam dancer based in the DC metro area. Her work as a clinician has centered around depression, anxiety, trauma, and intergenerational conflict in the South Asian community. She uses an interdisciplinary approach that integrates hypnotherapy with transpersonal elements of Reiki and Theta healing. Please welcome Dr. Sarika Persaud and Dr. Aparna Ramaswamy. Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to Chai Side Chats. So I wanted to start with I think it's kind of a simple question, but I get it a lot about therapy and mental health. And, I think the question is, what do people go to therapy for? Or what does therapy look like? And personally, I've noticed that this question comes from a lot of people who are interested or fascinated by psychology. But then when it comes to like seeking out therapy for themselves, they're like, I don't really know about that. So I'd love to hear how, both of you would kind of tackle that question, or specifically because you have experience working with South Asian folks in mental health.
So most people think that you go to therapy once you've started struggling with something. So especially in the South Asian community, honestly, people don't seek out therapy until things get really bad for them or until a doctor tells them like you really need to go. So it's unfortunate because therapy can help you when you're struggling with mental health or even relationships. Other things in your life doesn't necessarily only have to be your mental health. And there are types of therapies that are more symptoms targeted, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, that teach you specific skills that you can use to deal with symptoms focused kinds of things. On the other hand, though, there is a really wide tradition of psychotherapies, both in the West, like psychodynamic and psychoanalytic therapies, which are really focused on knowing yourself, exploring yourself, and knowing why you are the way you are. So you might not be experiencing chronic difficulties or mental illness symptoms per se, but there's still things you want to know about yourself and to help you evolve and grow. So there are more exploratory therapies, the ones that I mentioned, but of course in other traditions in the world, not only faith traditions, but I think there are indigenous ways of healing people that have to do with just knowing yourself. And I'm sure Dr. Ramaswamy can speak more about that because it seems like she's pretty experienced in that area too.
Very nicely said, Sarika, and I really appreciated that connection between West and Eastern constructs. But I think to answer the question, Aishwarya, who comes to therapy or why therapy, the clients that I see usually come in not necessarily because it's a diagnosed or diagnosable mental illness, but because they just don't feel good about what's going on. There is not a problem per se in life, but they're not happy. And of course, there is no DSM category for lack of happiness. So I come in at that point where I'm just not doing okay, and I ought to feel good, but I'm not, and I don't fit the criteria for a diagnosis of major depression or anxiety. So I want to find purpose in life. I want to find meaning in life. I want to be happy. I want to be productive, and that might also be reflective of where I am in my stage, as Erickson would say. I am in the generative state of life. So they want to find a purpose and meaning in their life. So that's typically people who come to me.
Yeah, I love what both of you said, and I feel like my mind is going in so many different directions. So I'm trying to find where I want us to direct the conversation next. But, one of the things that I've been thinking about with, just the type of work that both of you do and where kind of there's similarities and things like that is I've been thinking a lot about and reading a lot about mental health, mythology, and meaning making in this kind of world of how they're connected. And I think a lot of people will probably wonder, like, what do these things really have to do with each other? Like, how is mythology and meaning making related to mental health? And I think we've started to kind of touch on some of those things, but as clinicians who incorporate maybe some more like transpersonal elements into your work, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on how some of those things might be connected, or how you see them as being connected in like the client's issues that you see, or how it might look in the therapy room even.
Over the past couple of decades that I've been doing it, a long time ago, I used to look at mythology as a more like meaning making in the sense of what do our various characters in the mythologies and Puranas and whichever tradition we come from, what is the symbolism for me? What is the significance for me? For example, when we used to talk about the Ramayana, what is Sita's experience about it? She was one of our first prototypes of that feminist woman, one who chose to be alone, one who raised the children alone. So it was that sort of meaning making that I brought in, not just in the aspect of teaching dance and empowering them, because I happen to, like many of you, believe that expressive arts was the first healing tradition, if there was a first or a second. But then as I continued to grow as a therapist, working with people and clients taught me how to do it. Where I've landed now is I am in a role of a Dharmic spiritual advisor at Georgetown University. And where I find this mythology comes in is the relevance. There is so much of intelligence, spirituality, whatever it is you need to get at that stage. Those messages are there, whether it is in these concrete stories of Puranas or Itihasas or things like that, but pretty much any archetype that you have. And I think this is where you go into depth psychology and you can see the connection between almost all of these various modalities of theories and constructs and counseling and psychology. So I sort of look at mythology and meaning making more as how am I finding my own existential purpose in the larger cosmic story. If that's a little too abstract, I can go further, but Sarika, I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Yes, sure. I was there. So this question, I feel like you can answer in a couple of ways, which is how do I see myself reflected in myth? And then also, what is my personal story? What is my personal like myth, so to speak, or legend? So I feel like the way that I approach psychotherapy is really reflected well by, there's this theorist, or not really theorist, he's a writer, Gendlin. He was a psychoanalyst. And he has this concept of narrative therapy, which is, conceptualizing the person as a character in the story. So when you're sitting with the client, if you were to ask them, where are you in your story? What happened in the previous chapter and the one before that? What do you think is coming next? How are you going to get there? What characters, which people do you have to pull in? Which ones are going to get cut in the next chapter? Conceptualizing your life as a story can give you a little more, not only control over factors that feel like otherwise are out of your control, but also can help you make meaning out of things that otherwise feel disparate. And I think otherwise, like, people really need to find the feeling of meaning in their life. They need to feel that the things that happen to them are connected and have some meaning. Whether it's connected to a larger purpose or not, I think that's, depends on the person, but that the things that happen to me have led to some outcome that I'm experiencing today. So I think conceptualizing things as a story, as a narrative is really an approach I take. But on the other hand, when we talk about bringing in myth and how that relates, yeah, I think both of you I've heard you just speak about, depth psychology and Jungian psychology and myth making, but I know Aishwarya also, I think, has some interest as well in this idea of the archetype, that there are these repeated stories over history and legends, these storylines and these types of characters that we see across cultures that seem to live within all of us. So especially for masculine gender people, they tend to identify more with the hero's journey. And in every culture, there are stories of the hero. The Ramayana is a great example of the hero's journey. But besides that, the story of Gilgamesh, and I can name so many stories in every culture. There's a similar plot line of, the hero, he's born in some conditions where he feels like he fits, and in other ways he doesn't fit in. He's faced with a challenge. He has to find his real place through facing a series of challenges. And a lot of people who are more masculine gendered find this way of conceptualizing their life journey to relate to them a lot. People who tend to be more feminine gendered resonate, I find, more with this idea of different goddess archetypes, that at different times in our life, we embody the energies of different types of goddesses. So that could mean when you're in the generative stage, maybe there is a time where you're feeling, well, in the Greek mythology, you'd say like Hera or Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. There are challenges and strengths that come along with that. There are other times in our life where we're feeling like I exist for love and I'm this seductive being, and that their sexual energy is something that is very important to me. You're an Aphrodite, you're a Tara, Lakshmi. I mean, there's all these many different goddesses. So it's a lot, again, it's a really big topic, but I think so totally relevant if someone's open to discussing it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think like when both of you mentioned archetypes, I've actually recently started reading this book called The Archetypal Cosmos. And the author of that, there's this one quote that kind of stood out to me that I wanted to share, which he said that the unique spiritual challenge of our time demands its own solution and response in terms that are appropriate to the modern era and to the Western context from which it has emerged. And I feel like a lot of what he's saying there is that just, you know, times have changed with technology and, you know, all of these other things that we're having to deal with in the 21st century. And, you know, when we think about spirituality, I feel like there's a sense that a lot of traditions are living traditions, and they're also kind of evolving and changing with the times. And so, you know, as folks who are interested in all of these different areas of healing and different ways of working and interacting with people, I'd love to hear more about what each of you might see or how you might define what the unique spiritual challenge is for people today, either based on your own personal experiences or professionally based on the kind of clients and clinical work that you've done.
I do think that different times in our life, we do have certain spiritual kind of conflicts that come up, like at different ages in our life. But of this age in time, what I'm noticing happening at a societal level is grappling with the idea of power that has been coming up so much because we so badly want to see reform in these major systems, and yet people continue to experience them as oppressive, no matter what your political affiliation is. So in America, Republicans feel oppressed and Democrats feel oppressed and leftists feel oppressed, no matter what your affiliation is. And yet they're so badly wanting to feel a sense of power. And then on the other hand, grappling with, when I have power, can I sit comfortably with it? So if I accept the fact that I have privilege, can I be comfortable with that? I think a lot of people nowadays think power, authority, and oppression are the same thing. So if I hold power and if I have to acknowledge, oh, you know what, I actually have class privilege, which means that it lends me a sort of level of power in society. Does that mean I'm evil? I don't know. I don't think so. But some people can't acknowledge their own power. And then other times people can do things to, like, they, on the one hand, feel like they're sort of disempowered and in a victim mindset, and yet seek power. So it's I noticed, like, on a societal level, this question of who is in power and how are they using it. It's been coming up for a very long time. And I feel like things are starting to come to a head. We're wanting to see some change, but we don't know what it is yet. And it's coming up on an individual level too. Like, we see larger processes also play out in the therapeutic relationship. So there are clients I have who are like both really wanting to seek help from a therapist, but afraid of becoming dependent. They don't know what it means to open up to someone and be vulnerable without being dependent. Others who can act out against the fact that I do have more power in the therapy room, even though I'm using it to care and nurture people.
See, for me, spirituality is obviously, the dictionary meaning would be that which is beyond the physical. But obviously, immediately you need a physical to experience what is not the physical. It's very hard to experience something if you didn't live in a human body. So spirituality for me has always been that connection. Starts with a connection to you and then extends to beyond you. And my language for spirituality, for me, I of course resourced in Indian texts, because that's the most familiar in both language-wise, culturally, and that's kind of where I went. So for me, the language of spirituality was first dancing. My language of dancing was Bharatanatyam, classical Indian dancing, and as we all know that is it teaches you how to feel authentically what somebody in some poem felt a long time ago. It didn't matter whether you liked it or you agreed with it. I resented playing these, 13-year-old girls who wanted a guy and then he didn't come and she's languishing and I felt like, well, why can't you go and ask him? So for me, it was a challenge of what I learned later on was empathy. I had to experience the emotions of that young person, and as we know, you have to be that person. You can't pretend or emulate or play the role. So for me, that connection that life first gave me was through dancing. I later found the vocabulary of yoga and meditation to answer what that experience of dancing was. So for me, my first brush with spirituality and therapy was in the medium of dancing. And then later on, as I tried to extrapolate it, when I worked with people who were not dancers or who didn't want to be dancers, how do I extrapolate that sense of authenticity, genuineness, and honesty that found me in dancing? How can I extrapolate that into other parts of therapy? For me, it was meditation. How do you meditate when you walk? How can you be mindful when you talk? How can we engage as we are across Zoom, the three of us, and still create that space of oneness and genuineness where we feel like I can be all of who I am and I'm okay and something is happening. So for me as a therapist, as a teacher, as a person, what I am constantly learning how to do better and growing is creating that authentic space. And that's where, Aishwarya, you kind of touched upon the transpersonal part. I do believe that the most powerful device or agent in that interaction is my personhood. Not necessarily my hands, my legs, and my eyes, but that aspect of me that powers me up, the transpersonal part. So for me, it's doing everything that I can and sometimes making sure I do nothing to interfere with that transpersonal aspect that can spontaneously emerge in any interaction, where I believe healing then becomes spontaneous. And of course, in a therapeutic language, that person sitting across from me experiences it as safety, authenticity, genuineness that can't be faked, but they sense it, in terms of it, it's neurologically through their mirror neurons. So for me, that's been my journey in bringing spirituality in multiple ways in interactions.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, I think you really spoke to the similarities that I see and that I really appreciate too between spirituality and psychology, which I think people sometimes pit them against each other because it feels like it's like science versus, religion or something like that. But I think, what both of you kind of touched on is this idea of empathy and compassion really kind of being at the heart of both of those things. And it's interesting because I think at the same time, sometimes when I think particularly about trauma, sometimes these like spiritual ideas or sayings or beliefs that people have about everything being predestined or everything happening for a reason, I feel like for me, that's where I see maybe more conflict between those two fields. And it feels like that explanation of everything happening for a reason or everything being predetermined sort of like diminishes the impact of the trauma and of the suffering. So I'm curious, how both of you navigate these like potentially conflicting areas. And yeah, especially because I think in clinical work, we see like all sorts of things and people have beliefs that are inhibiting parts of themselves as well that they're bringing into the room too. So
Thank you for asking that question, Aishwarya. I'm seeing that more now in my role as a spiritual advisor. It's like, how do you make sense and how can you possibly find a silver lining in a loss that you've had, in a sexual trauma that you've had, in something that has just wrenched the heart out of you? How could you possibly find something good? I can't come up with a good enough answer. And I think this is where sciences like logotherapy comes in, where you find meaning in it, you find a belonging, and it doesn't happen right away. There's a time to grieve and say, this awful thing has happened to me. And it takes time for some people just to heal from it. And there are some who are able to rise above it and say, that does not define me. It's an attribute. It'll always be a powerful attribute. It'll always bring me to my knees, kind of like a panic attack. It's hard to think your ways out through a panic attack. You got to experience it. So when you come to things as predestined, I struggle to actually defend that. If that's your philosophy and that's your conceptualization, I would work with that and try to help you understand how even predestined events can be learning opportunities. And frequently, when you hear the explanation, the rationale behind it, obstacles are given as an invitation for you to learn from it so that obstacle is removed. But if someone does not believe in that predestined part and they want to talk about free will, you really can't go the scientific route. Is there something as free will? Because everything that I do and say, in some ways, is predetermined by all my conditionings. The language I use, the experiences I have, whatever life has given me, in some ways, converge to dictate what I'm going to say. So there is a scientific way to also come about it. But I think the part that is implied here is there a theistic aspect? Is there a God that's predetermining all of these things? And I think that's up to your belief. And if you do believe it, there is a way you can work with that too. And if you don't believe it, there's also a way to make sense of what am I going to do with this trauma that has come my way? Not so much what is the learning the trauma has brought for me? I hope I'm making some sense. Sarika, what do you think?
Yeah, I really love your answer because I think those two things are not mutually exclusive, that something might have been designed for me to learn a lesson, and also it really hurts and it was unfair in this current moment. So we can feel the pain and the suffering that we feel right now and actually feel it to all its depths, because sometimes experiencing that pain is part of the lesson. I think sometimes in life, when we're on the road to becoming our most authentic self and really like aligning with our purpose, sometimes life tends to throw these tests in front of you. Whether you feel they're predestined or whatever they are, they appear in front of you. And sometimes when you choose so-called wrong, or you choose something that maybe is leading you away from your purpose or from who you really are, you get burned so badly that you'll never do that thing ever again. You'll never go for a person like that again, or you'll never go for an opportunity that's actually less than your worth ever again. So in the moment and right after it happens, yeah, I think after I've gone through a horrible breakup, I don't want someone to tell me, oh, well, this was all happened for a reason. That's not very empathic of you. Just say, yeah, it really hurts and that person should not have done that, or, whatever, it's be empathic in the moment. But usually people do find meaning in things in time. That said, yeah, there is a theological aspect to this, because a lot of major religions have some belief in predestination, but the level to which things are predestined is different, and who is predestining things is different. So is there a creator God who has created the path of your life for you, and this is only one life? Are you the one designing your life, and do you have many lives, or do you have one life? Is every single thing in your life predestined, or just major moments? And what's the meaning of that? Do you have free will in between? So I think the way people conceptualize predestination can really impact how you understand and make meaning of your experiences to a certain extent. But either way, I think understanding, or like being able to be comforted by the fact that I might not understand this now, but someday I will find meaning in it, not comfort necessarily, but meaning. It's something hopeful.
I want to say one thing here too, and I think if you really think about it, all the philosophies that exist in the Eastern world are really talking about finding an answer to explain, why am I suffering? Why is there? And if you really think about it that way, philosophy may have been the original psychology. And of course, we call it now transpersonal psychology, but that's the core of all philosophies, giving you an understanding of reality. Is it a God? Is it no God? Why does bad stuff happen? So you're right, Aishwarya, in thinking that there's not much of a difference. They're on a continuum, and the words they use, the constructs they use are different, but at the core, we're all trying to make meaning of stuff that's happening to us in life and being able to hold what may be the dialectic. You mentioned the DBT hope. Like, I love this, but at the same time, it's not good for me. How do I make those choices? How do I let go of that abuser? How do I walk away from this person I love so much, but is not good for me? How do I find that boundary? How do I develop my sense of self? But of course, that may be a conversation for a whole different meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for addressing that. I think that is a question that I've always sort of wrestled with. Ever since I came into this field, I've always been like, wait, but this doesn't make sense in the context of all this other stuff happening. And I think it's definitely an ongoing meaning-making process, right? So yeah, I mean, I would say my personal philosophy as a therapist is kind of like we've been talking about, is kind of supporting clients and how they make meaning of their lives. And so kind of in that spirit or in that vein, I think both of you touched on how the arts can be really helpful. And I think just metaphor and symbolism in general can be really helpful in that meaning making process, or just kind of self-awareness related things. So for our experiential activity, I thought we could do a little bit of, I guess, show and tell doesn't feel like the right way to describe it, but for lack of other better description, we're going to go with that. So I want to invite you to choose an object or a figurine or an image or a piece of clothing or something that you feel very connected to, or that helps to bring meaning into your life. So it could be something that grounds and centers you, or it could be something that maybe brings a little more energy and joy and liveliness. And as always, I want to invite my viewers and listeners to also kind of maybe look around your homes or offices or wherever you might be and try to find something that you feel very connected to, or something that really grounds or centers you in some way. So either of you want to share what objects you have?
So mine, I guess I'll explain a little about it first and then I'll show you. So I had, I think maybe it was 2 years ago or so, I was feeling like a pretty good deal of anxiety in my life, I think at that time. I'm trying to remember. I just remember I was stressed or about something. And I would pass by this one store twice a week on 32nd Street in Manhattan, which some of you might know that in that area in Manhattan of Midtown is Koreatown or K-Town. And there was this store that has all of these cute little like things, like stuffed animals and pens and stuff like that. And I was taking myself so seriously at that time. I would pass by the store and I'd be like, oh, the things in there are so cute. I wish I could buy one, something like that, but I can't be spending my money on these childish things now. I was like, I don't know who told me that. So then I said that to one of my friends once. I said, oh, there's a store. I took a picture actually as I was passing by and I was like, this is so cute. Okay, and here it is. I'll tell you that I bought it. He's this cute little teddy bear and he's holding a heart. Yes, I love him. So I saw him in the shop window and I was like, it's so cute, but like, I'm not going to be out here spending my adult salary on a stuffed animal. And she's like, why not? Why can't you? You're an adult. You could do whatever you want. If a little teddy bear is going to make you happy, go and get that teddy bear. And so I did. And I love him so much. His name is Ryan. I did not name him. He came with that name. So I don't know what the name is yet. I'm still feeling him out, but I really love him. And sometimes I pick him up out of my drawer and I just go, and it makes me happy.
I love that. It's like you're so connected to your inner child too. It's great.
Yeah, exactly.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum. So for me, I've always struggled with religion because it didn't make sense to me, some parts of it. My mother was very religious, so that's the part of me that I could not hold because it was not sensible. And here I find myself as an adult, kind of, you talked about myth and meaning making, and I have an image here. I don't know if it'll pull up on the screen, okay? It's got two images. one's of the goddess and one's of Ganesha. So what this has come to mean to me is, when I look at the goddess, I'm reminded of that feminine power, the superpower that's in me and in everyone that I work with. And this particular goddess is, of course, one who kills all the demons. And of course, the demons are nothing but my demons of emotional pettiness, the anger, the jealousy, all those fun stuff that make me human and what I'm not so proud of. So every time I feel like disempowered, every time I feel somebody cuts me off in a meeting or somebody talks down to me, or I feel triggered that I feel like an idiot in front of people, I kind of look over and I remind myself that no, I represent that goddess. So I'm going to fight that demons of insecurity and remember that I too have that power in me. I have the Ganesha in front because even though that reminder is there, I don't always believe it. I do feel like I need an external locus. Somebody is going to come in and swoop and make my life better. I'm not yet there where I just own my own power in that sense some days. So I look at both of them and say, I'm striving to that, and I remember that some days I make it. And even on those days, help me. And do I think of them as God, as in the uppercase G? Yes and no. I think of them as energies, archetypes that sometimes you need external agents in addition to your own inner strength. And I think this is kind of where therapists come in too. We remind people of who they are, but in the meantime, see what I see reflected in me. Use me as a mirror because I see your strength. So that's my show and tell.
It's interesting you said that they're kind of opposites, because I don't see them as opposites in that, to me, I love Kali so much. Like, I'm so connected to her, and I see the ups and downs of my life as just her playing with me. And in her hands, I am this. This is just what I am. Whenever I take myself too seriously or take my life too seriously, I remember that this is just what I am. I'm a little teddy bear. At heart, and it's all a game, and we're all going to do it again if you believe in reincarnation, and again and again.
Yep, very well said.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you both for sharing. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode, but I want to thank you both so much for being here and sharing all of your wonderful insights about all things related to mental health, mythology, and meaning making. And yeah, I think if viewers or listeners want to check out more of your work, I'm going to drop your, websites and other information about you in the description. So feel free to check those out below. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having us, and wonderful seeing you, Sarika.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Chai Side Chats with Aparna and Sarika on mental health, mythology, and meaning making. Please do like, share, and subscribe to the Creativity Awakening YouTube channel for regular updates on our videos. If you want to get more exclusive sneak peeks into the creative process of Chai Side Chats here, you can follow our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, which are linked in the description below. Stay tuned, the next episode of Chai Side Chats will be coming soon.